I've always been good at losing. I've spent most of my life writing books that have never sold. I just lost my dream job after 10 years, and after 3 months of parenting a newborn, I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm exhausted and I'm stuck, and I still don't know what's next. In this video, I'm going to use it all. I'm going to take you through some of my biggest failures from a life that is frankly full of them. Partly to process my feelings, sure, but also to breathe life into characters that struggle and lose and try again. Characters that also know what it's like to lose. Because in spite of everything, I'm still a writer. When bad things happen to me, I feel them, but then I get back to work and I use it. Okay, before we go any further, I should probably give you a bit of a recap. I'm writing a fantasy short story based on my decade of experience working professionally in esports. It's going to be a classic tournament arc featuring magical combat, and there are two main characters right now. One is named Varric, who is an old, experienced mage that has seen it all and is sort of on the brink of retirement. And the other is a plucky up-and-comer named Tan, who hasn't seen anything and is a little bit less rigid in his thinking and open to creative solutions, which is going to be really important for the story. It also has this kind of interesting magic system where the mages compete in teams of 3. There's a point person in the arena who does all of the actual fighting, and then 2 tandems in the wings who are using their magic through their point hero, based obviously on MOBAs. And the whole story is sort of inspired by my longtime obsession with an older League of Legends team called the Rocks Tigers. If you're a fan of the game, you're definitely gonna see some parallels there. And if all of this sounds interesting to you, you can definitely go watch my first video in the series where I go through all of that in a lot more detail. But for the sake of understanding what's happening today, I think you really just need to know that this is a classic underdog sports story featuring a lot of magic. Okay, so in terms of things that we need to solve today, we do need to establish how the tournament actually works, and we need to have a sort of at least general sense of what the rules to professional magic really are. Last time I talked about this idea that this tournament is going to have a very physical meta. So the point mages that act as this conduit for the supporting tandem mages who, practice their magic from the wings. These are going to be really physical people who have a lot of dexterity or strength and are probably young and in their physical prime. And if that's the case, I need to show teams that excel under these circumstances. So let's get right into it. Let's start chipping away at the rules of the tournament, and then we can answer these other questions from there. Okay, I'm really happy with what I was able to put together here. I'm gonna quickly recap, and then I'll get into more of the details as I start actually writing the story. But very quickly, the rules of the tournament. I think basically we're gonna have just 2 rounds. So there are 8 teams participating in the arena at once. The finals or World Cup or whatever I'm going to call this, it's 32 teams. They each play an initial round and 2 teams advance to the finals, which is 8 teams, winner take all. Now, what are the actual rules? I think it's going to be capture the flag. I think we're going to keep it really simple. Maybe we can allude to there being really crazy stuff in years past, but I think basically there's 8 teams, 2 flags. You find a flag, you bring it back to your spawn. I think there's going to literally be spawns. I think the teams are going to be portaled into this arena. You bring it back to your spawn point and you win, or you advance. I think that in the finals, there's actually only going to be 1 flag. So that sort of brings us to the big structural question of the story. What does Tan do? This whole time that I've been planning it, I've been saying that he does some kind of fringe magic and finds a creative solution, but I do need to settle on what the creative solution is going to be. So I think that in a year where everybody is just fighting each other, Tan, who is a necromancer by trade but has been pushed into these other schools of magic, realizes that the whole event is happening on an ancient battlefield and there are a lot of skeletons. And so he comes up with some use for necromancy to create a bunch of skeletons that distracts or impedes the other teams while Varric books it to the flag. But I think that basically what's going to end up happening is, because there's only one flag and only one winner, Tan can't actually impede all 7 other teams, and Varric does end up having to fight one team. And I think that that team should be the team that kicked him. I've called them the Lions for now, and I think that he's going to lose. So I'm pretty happy with this. I think this answers the core questions that I had today, and I think that next time I can put together a quick outline of the story itself, and then it's going to be time to start drafting in earnest, which I'm really excited to do. I've done a lot of prep on this story. I really want to start writing it. So we'll get to that next time. Yeah. Is it another day to ruin my shoot? Another day? Another time? That's good. Okay, honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this next part because it's embarrassing and it doesn't make me feel great, but the point of this video is learning from our losses, and that's going to tie back to the writing. And if I'm not willing to actually talk about the hard stuff, then what am I doing here? So I'm going to talk about it. This might surprise a lot of people, but the job market is really bad right now. For me, when it comes to the job hunt, I'm kind of battling 2 problems. The first is that I'm a new father. My daughter is just over 2 months old at the time that I'm recording this video, and that is not a hugely productive time in most people's lives. You know, parental leave does exist for a reason. It's hard. If I get 2 hours in front of this desk in a day, I consider that really lucky. I am by no means working a 40-hour week right now. I think it's impossible for me to work a 40-hour week right now. So I'm stuck in this position where I'm contemplating huge changes to my life, and I have almost no time to do it. I did get the chance to do a little bit of freelance work right after we were all let go. And honestly, that was a great feeling. It was a fun project. I made some money. It was a confidence boost. But since then, I have not landed another gig, which means I haven't been working for pay since early December, which is also the longest stretch, I guess, that's been true since I was like a teenager. The bottom line here, I guess, is I know how my characters are feeling. I have also taken a lot of L's lately. And honestly, I have found myself saying to my wife and saying to my friends, like, I need a single win. And I think some piece of momentum would make all of this so much easier. But we are still chasing that feeling. Okay, the plan today is I really want to start actually writing this thing, but I want a quick outline first, so we're going to start there. Okay, that is a really, really simple, bare bones outline, but it's all that I'm going to do for now because I want to give myself room to actually do some sort of discovery writing when it comes to drafting this project. So where things are, this is going to be a milieu story. It's going to start and basically end with the actual arena of the finals. I do think there's going to be a sort of epilogue scene at the end where we see Tan succeeding later in his career and Varric is proud. But basically, this is a story that takes place entirely in the arena with a couple of flashbacks. I think it's a very simple story, but I think that's okay. It is a short story. So this gives me a lot of room to play with character, to have some really fun action and some creative magic. And I think enough flexibility to still enjoy the process of actually drafting this story, which is very important. So we're going to start actually drafting. I don't know how much of this I'm going to use in the cut. Honestly, I need to jam out like 7, maybe 8,000 words so I can prune it back a little. It's a good amount of writing. It's going to take several sessions. I'm not going to get it done in an hour. So I'm going to film what I can. I might time lapse some portions of this. I might work at some portions of this off camera. I am going to try to make sure that I record every time I have something interesting to say. But for now, I'm just going to leave the camera rolling as I get started on this project. Okay, so I'm done with writing the first scene in the short story, and maybe I should have seen this problem coming because it's like the only thing that I didn't extensively outline. But now that I'm writing, I just realized I don't have a really clear understanding of how the magic works. I think the core idea here that there's a point conduit mage in the arena, and then there are people outside of the arena who are channeling their magic into them. That's pretty simple, and I think people will understand that without too much trouble. But I do think I need to go one layer deeper than that and explain what's actually happening and how it works. I think we need to establish like at least 1 or 2 clear rules, especially 1 or 2 clear limitations, so that when those rules get broken or circumvented in the climax of the story, it feels really satisfying to the reader. This is like a classic Brandon Sanderson truism. It's why a lot of his magical reveals and solutions feel so satisfying. And I totally agree with his philosophy here. So that's not necessarily a problem I need to solve during the drafting, but it's something I'm gonna have to come back to in revisions. So if I can think of a solution while I'm writing, it's gonna make my life easier down the road. All right, story time. When I was middle school age, I think I would have been like 12, and this was in January, a good friend of mine got frustrated with me, I guess, constantly talking about how I was going to write one day, and told me that basically if I wanted to be an author, I should just write a book. He bet me that I couldn't finish one by the end of the year. And so over the course of grade 7 and the beginning of grade 8, I wrote my first book. The book is called Horizon. According to the cover page, it was 31,000 words, so I guess it was more of a novella. And I kept a printed out copy of it all through my teenage years and my adult life. It has moved through so many houses with me, always in the bottom of a trunk. I paid a girl in my class to do this cover in what seems to be pencil crayon. I genuinely think it rules, and I have held on to the original for what is rapidly approaching 20 years. And at the end of the year, my friend did ultimately pay up. So I guess you could say that was my first writing commission. Now that book was truly, truly terrible. It was written by a child, and it reads like it was written by a child, but I kept going, I kept getting better. I wrote another book, then another and another. In my early 20s, I spent years rewriting an urban fantasy that sucked, but sucked a little less. But eventually I abandoned it for what I would call my first serious book. This monstrosity, which according to this printed draft was 167,000 words at the time because I was in my epic fantasy era. Wow, it makes a big noise to put down. Okay. I gave it to some friends to read and they said they liked it. And ultimately I wrote and rewrote that book over and over again, all through my 20s. And at the end of 2022, I finally decided to take it out on query. It was the first time that I sent my fiction out to publishing professionals, and I actually recorded myself talking about that experience a little bit. My expectations are honestly pretty low. I'm keeping them low. Everyone agrees that right now is an incredibly difficult time to be breaking into the industry cold, but it's not necessarily my expectation that this book is going to sell. Really, my goal is just to get past the initial querying stage. If I can get a few partials or fulls out, if I can get some personalized feedback, I think that that will go a long way to giving me the tools that I need to really succeed with the next book. Spoiler, I did not get any requests. I did not get partials. I did not get fulls. I certainly did not land an agent. The book was routinely rejected by all of the agents that I was most excited to work with. And in hindsight, I understand why. It was not ready for publication. That was a real low point for my confidence in myself, in my writing, in my career. I was beginning to really doubt that I was ever actually going to do this. I was starting to feel like I'd spent my entire life dreaming about doing a thing that I just wasn't good enough to do. And I think a lot of artists will be able to relate to those kinds of uncertainties. But at the end of last year, when I lost my job, they came flooding back. So when it comes to my characters, I really am writing from this place of deep personal experience. I know a lot about failing at things, trust me. And that includes this video because, plot twist, this story is not done. It's not close to being done. It's not going to be done. We're now finishing it in this episode. Okay, so we have made some progress on the story this week, but I feel like we're still missing something. I'm about halfway through the draft. We're sitting at around 2,700 words right now. But I'm realizing as I go through the draft that if the whole thing is kind of meant to be about losing, then that theme isn't necessarily coming through as strongly as it should. And on one hand, I could be doing more to signpost that in the scenes that I've already written. But on the other hand, I think the best thing that I can do today is cheat a little bit, skip to the ending, write that really important, critical, climactic scene where the team does lose in the finals, and then I'll have a good understanding of what I'm building up to as I connect the dots. The other thing that I really need to keep in mind here is that the Rocks Tigers were a really, really good team. They were a really, really strong team. I think a lot of modern fans that weren't watching back in the day, if they've heard of them, they've just heard of them through the lens of, oh, this team that lost SKT at Worlds and almost did it, and we're almost the best team in the world. But to be almost the best team in the world, you have to beat everybody else too.
Team Life Baron taken. Oh, it's taken by Smeb. Smeb stole the Baron. Smeb stole the Baron. This group of players that had either retired or been rejected by other teams comes in. No big sponsor, no big team house. It's not necessary. Rocks Tigers take it. GG. It's about time.
So I think I need to walk a really fine line here. There are things I want to do thematically, and I want to make sure that my character arcs make sense and my story makes sense. But I also do want to stay somewhat true to the sort of source material here, the inspiration for this story. And I think that I want the ending to feel triumphant, but also kind of sad. I want it to be bittersweet. And if I'm leaning too heavily into the bitter, then the story doesn't work. This is the point where I should probably say, for the sake of this video, that I think I have solved the problem in terms of the major limitation of magic and the reason that this necromancy wasn't going to work originally, which is that there is a competitive rule that magic can only affect one thing at one time. So the sorts of things that necromancy is theoretically capable of don't work in a tournament setting, and they take too long and they're cumbersome and all these other things. What Tan is going to figure out is basically that because of the amount of raw material that he has around him, he can quickly swap from one bone or skeleton to the other, creating some big construct or a bunch of skeletons. I haven't written the scene yet, but basically he's going to be able to do the sorts of things that, you know, a reader would expect necromancy to be able to do. But it's the first time that that's ever been possible in the context of competitive magic. So that's a kind of big moment that has happened prior to the scene that I'm now writing. And I think I feel pretty good about that direction. What I also really like about this idea is it lets me give this kind of subtle nod back to StarCraft. So if you're not familiar with Brood War, the maximum number of units you can control is 12. And a big part of the story of that game is the way that as it developed over time, more and more mechanically proficient players who were faster and faster at inputting commands were able to make these big armies move really seamlessly and have really precise micro, even though they were extremely limited by what the physical engine of the game would allow them to do. So I really like the idea that Tan kind of emerges as one of the first mages that has really good, let's call it micro, at a time when not everyone else has that skill. Maybe he's not like the Flash or Jaedong, but maybe he's like the July, like someone that comes along who just has micro at a level that we haven't really seen before. Okay, that was really fun, and getting to write this scene now that I have a better understanding of the magic system and the limitations and what Tan is actually doing was even more satisfying than all of the ways I've thought about this going. I definitely still have some gaps to fill in. I definitely still need to connect the dots to the rest of my story. This puts the total word count at just under 3,400 words. So I still have a solid 40 to 50% to write, but I think I have a really clear roadmap, and even more so than before, I'm pretty excited about where this story is going. Okay, I feel pretty confident in saying that I'm done writing what I'm actually going to write for this video. I think there's a very strong foundation here and that I'm in a good spot to finish relatively promptly from here. The draft is sitting at about 3,400 words, so I'm somewhere between halfway and 60% of the way through the actual writing. I spent the afternoon going through the words on the page here, and what I would like to do now is just take you through some highlights. So obviously there were a couple of things that I was concerned about with the beginning of the story. I wanted to make sure that I was setting up the stakes for Varric, getting us into the action, and introducing the magic system in a way that makes sense. I feel like I'm achieving 2.5 of those things in the draft as it exists right now. We have Varric being portaled in to the finals of the tournament. We have this kind of cool, Hunger Games-esque moment where the sort of very small battle royale starts. We introduce the idea of the tandem mages, and then we have this fight immediately that Varric's not involved in, but he witnesses, and it sets up, his main rival. Then we have what I think is going to be the last flashback scene here where Tan convinces his teammates to use necromancy. The scene's not quite done. This is where I kind of left off with my chronological draft. What I do really want to share, though, are some highlights from this sort of climax scene that I wrote earlier today, because I think some of the writing turned out really lovely, and I'm very happy with this moment that we're kind of building towards. Ahead of him, the cathedral looms, or what remains of it. The once majestic structure is a bombed-out ruin, long ago destroyed by action and avarice, now just a part of all the detritus that remains after humankind is done waging war. It's a metaphor as much as it is history, and also, it's still beautiful. Varric doesn't need to see the stained glass and the fragmented window panes to imagine its kaleidoscope of color and craft. Doesn't need to see the arched ceilings careening towards the heavens to know that once people reached for them with their hammers and with their songs. Today, it's no longer a church, a crumbling facade, a handful of fossilized fragments of wall and stone, but some bones can stand the test of time. Sometimes it only takes one person to remember that they were part of something greater, to imagine that they could still be. Varric steps through the threshold. Ronak is there, waiting for him. He's done this for long enough to know how the last two teams in a finals are supposed to look. They're supposed to look like him, battered, wounded, covered in the uncalcified cracks of their wounds, scars in the stones of their souls, and on the future of their skin. Ronak is pristine. He looks exactly the same as he did when Varric last saw him hours ago at the spawn points, exactly the same as the day that he personally told Varric he'd be replacing him. Red hands, muddy water, radio rage and newsprint punditry, and the total silence that a career makes when it dies. My God, Rail said over comms. Hasn't anybody hit this guy? So I'm really happy with the way I was able to set up Ronick as the kind of final boss. He's someone that's been totally untouched so far in the finals, and we know Varric has really struggled to get here. And I'm also really pleased with the way I was able to set up the cathedral as a sort of mirror to the necromancy that obviously has become really important to the action at this point in the story. It's just like a really nice, tidy piece of parallelism. Then we have the actual fight scene, which I haven't written yet, and we have this this moment where Varric goes down. Ronick is kind of staring down at him, and we see this revenant closing its jaws around him as he passes out. When I was in high school, I got called up in front of the whole grade to receive some award. I think it was honor roll, like a little slip of paper they gave you as a thank you for keeping your grades up. And while I was walking up the stage, I tripped. I wiped out dramatically in front of everyone. So I got up and did the only thing I could think to do in that moment. I took that piece of paper and then I took a little bow. 4 or 5 years later, when I was in university, I'd started dating my now wife, and we were hanging out at the house she shared with her university roommates. We found out a friend of hers had grown up in this little city that was about 30 minutes away from my hometown, and we had some acquaintances in common. And after chatting for a few minutes, she looked at me really directly and said, "Wait, I know you. You're the kid that fell." Look, at the end of the day, I've been having a hard few months. But as I've been editing this video, I keep coming back to a couple of clips that I think really sum up an unexpected sort of side effect of this whole project. But for some reason, writing short fiction on this channel has really rekindled something in me. I'm having so much fun. I'm just doing the thing, and there's a real joy in that. And finding that fun feels like a bit of a breakthrough. Even though, honestly, a lot of what I'm doing in this story is just really simple, finding a lot of joy in those simple things feels amazing, and I think is going a long way to repairing my relationship with my own work, if that makes sense. Because yeah, my confidence in my own work and my own abilities has definitely been damaged by everything that's been going on lately. So it's just a good feeling that every time I sit down in this chair lately, I feel jazzed up to be doing it. I feel lucky to be doing it. I haven't felt that way in a while. It's safe to say that I don't have a big audience on this channel. YouTube is not a career for me. It is a really, really long way away from ever being a career again. But that doesn't mean that it's pointless. And I'm honestly having way too much fun to stop. So I am going to keep doing the thing. I'm gonna keep making shit that I care about for people that I love, even if it's not for anyone else, even when it's hard, even when life gets in the way. And if I ever get knocked down, I am going to stand myself back up and I'm going to take a bow. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you want to support the work I'm doing here, the best thing you can do right now is all the classics: like, comment, subscribe. It really does make a difference, especially for a channel as small and new as this one. Otherwise, please stay tuned for the next video when I will hopefully be finishing up this story, or at least getting very close. And actually, let me know in the comments how you would like to see the final product published. Do you want a text post on my website? Would you like an audiobook type of video where it's read to you here on YouTube? I'm genuinely curious because I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do with this thing when it's done. So I'd love to hear from you. And thanks again for watching.